Pierre, you just said Patrick Kane. I just saw a tweet today where it's like he doesn't know what he like. What does he want to do? Stay in Chicago? Like, is that actually an option to just ride it out?
It is, and we've mentioned that all year that let's be careful not to 100% assume he's getting dealt, and it's interesting that for us that sit here and look at this, it's such a no-brainer that you should want to go somewhere, but I thought it was instructive earlier this season. I had Claude Giroux in our podcast, Ryan Rashog and I, and he talked about how agonizing it was for him when he got dealt last year. And it was like, wait a minute, the whole world knew you were getting dealt last year. But it's a reminder that just because we know that and we talked for months about it, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is like a slam dunk for these guys. And there's sometimes the last person to sort of process it, if you know what I mean. Especially when it's the only team you ever played for, which was the case for Giroux, and then certainly it's the case for Kane. Now, the other layer to all this was Patrick Kane, and we talked about that on Insider Trading as well, as how he's feeling physically, right, his health. And, he missed a few games last month. He's been fighting sort of a nagging thing, and whether or not that ultimately plays into it, we'll see. But all along, my sense was that his agent, Pat Brisson, would want to confer with him here pretty soon and sort of decide whether or not they want to go through this process. We should know that soon, I think.
I wonder if these players take into consideration the Matt Sundin experience in Toronto, where Matt's had the right to decline a deal, and he did that, and then some people turned on him.
He was dragged through the mud. It was terrible.
Yeah. It was. And I, as much as Kane is beloved there, and likely, to be fair to Matts, probably more so in Chicago because he's won 3 Cups. Matts didn't obviously do that here in Toronto, but everyone loved Matt Sundin. Would he take that into consideration? I would think his agent should consider that. Like, in Chicago, they're tanking. They want out. They want to move on. If Kane declines a deal and the details get out on what's on the table, he could become the guy that they turn on.
Yeah, the only thing, there's 2 things there. It's an excellent point. Number one, there's the idea that when a player has a 100% no trade clause, it's absolutely his right to say, you know what, I want to wait till the summer to figure this out, which is what Sundin did. And I think, Pat Brisson in conversations with everyone has reminded people that that's potentially Kane's right. We'll see where this goes. But the other thing that the no trade does, and is really mitigate the return if it's 100% no trade clause in some cases. At the end of the day, Claude Giroux really just picked Florida last year, and that kind of limited what the Flyers could get in return. 2 years ago, Taylor Hall, basically, cherry-picked the Bruins at the very end near the deadline and turned down, it sounds like, a better return, we think, to Vegas. For the Buffalo Sabres, and instead he goes to Boston. I don't know if you guys remember this, for a second-round pick. So, and why that was such a low return, even though he was pending UFA, is because he had a 100% no move. And that's the other thing to remember here with Kane. If he does decide to go somewhere, he's not giving Chicago a list of 8 teams. There's no way in my mind that's happening. I think it's going to be, if he decides he's okay with going, 1 or 2 teams at most, in my mind. And if that's the case, this isn't going to be a bonanza for Chicago Blackhawks, despite how talented this guy is, because they don't get to actually put him out there to the whole market. And I think that's another important thing to really remember here in this case.
I don't know if you guys know this, but what's crazy? Guess how many no trade clauses there are in the NBA? Guess.
0.
1.
All right.
Bradley Beal, the only one. Do you think are we ever going to get that genie back in the box, Pierre? Is that just I think Doug Armstrong, he refuses to give them out. Is that right?
It's actually the guy that's given out the least in the NHL is David Poile in Nashville. And now he also has some contracts that are probably not quite as easily movable because maybe he has some players who make too much money. But in terms of the actual amount of no trade clauses, Nashville has the fewest in the league. You're right. Doug Armstrong's tried to fight that too. Ryan O'Reilly does not have one, but Vladimir Tarasenko, a player that we believe will move because he's pending UFA, he has a 100% no trade.
Wow.
So, you know, I think he wants to get dealt, but it means that he can, dictate part of where he's headed. And that's so important to remember that because it really changes the outlook of what you can get back at your team.